Tessa McKinley, John Petersen, Nora Shine, Andrew Sorts, Yebin Wang, and myself. And Evelyn Abaya Isaiah will be joining us shortly. In an effort to make our meetings as secure as possible, members of the public may view the meeting using ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of our agenda. And those who wish to comment during the meeting were asked to register 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting using the link that's also found at the top of our agenda. These procedures are posted on our public participation policy, BEDH. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the ActonTV website at actontv.org. For our remote policy, all votes will be done by roll call. I'll call each member's name and they will state how they vote. Like we did last week, I'll call us alphabetically since I've moved all of the squares on my chessboard in that order. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, back in the virtual setting. And once again, please have patience with us as we work to remember to find our mute buttons and bring guests and members of the public in and out of the meeting. I'm going to move us right to public participation. So if there are members of the public who are pre-registered who would like to speak about an item that is not on our agenda, please raise your hands in Zoom and you can be recognized to speak for 3 minutes each. Can I have a member of the committee do the timing for us? 3 minutes. Tessa, thank you very much. Okay, so let's just see here. Anybody? Mr. Benson has his hand up. Anybody else? Not at this moment. Okay. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Martin.
Good evening, Martin Benson, 21 Deacon Hunt Drive. I would like to notify the school committee and the public that we are still waiting on full compliance with public records requests for both emails and text messages relating to the retirement of the colonial mascot, including text messages amongst the school superintendent and school committee members during the school committee meetings of October 15th and December 17th, 2020. We further await the school committee's response to the stern order issued by the Secretary of the Commonwealth on January 13th, 2022, and we expect those records to be provided without any further dilatory tactics by legal counsel for the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else from the public wish to make a public comment for something that's not on the agenda? Please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, we will move on to the superintendent's update. Peter.
All right, good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone. I am hoping that soon we can do in-person meetings again. A couple, updates for you. One, COVID vaccination rates are going very well in terms of first doses and second doses of the vaccine for our students. We now have every school in the district has a vaccination rate of 80% or higher, which is fantastic. One area I will say, however, we are lagging and we want to get the word out is in terms of the number of students who have had their booster shot. That is actually relatively low. And Dawn, you can jump in, but I think it was around 25% overall of our eligible students have gotten their booster shot. So we do want to continue to encourage families to do that. We are running a booster clinic for students coming up in partnership with the Acton Board of Health and Dawn, I believe the pharmacy as well. Is that correct?
Right now, because we have very low enrollment, it's just the Acton Health Department.
Okay. So we're just not seeing the same level of interest in the booster shot that we saw in the original vaccine. So we would love to encourage families to, pursue the booster shot as well for students. I, also think, what we've hypothesized a little bit is that families may be thinking that if a child had COVID or a student had COVID, that they're not going to be eligible for the boosters. I think there might be a little bit of a misperception that it's kind of that thing of 90-day rule that people think about. That's not the case for booster shots. As soon as they're done with I believe it's the 10 days after they're eligible for their booster. So, we just want to make sure we get the good information out there around that. In terms of COVID planning, the good news is we're seeing cases drop precipitously in the district, just like we saw them come on at the beginning of December. So we are headed toward a much better place, which is very good news. We're going to continue to watch that before we start to relax more restrictions. The only thing I will say, we do have some athletic teams where our kids are headed into the final kind of week of their season here, particularly during their last year. We have some senior nights and things like that. We did end up allowing more fans into the games so that the kids can kind of end the season on a high note. We really don't think that the kids going to games was a significant source of transmission. And we talked to, the Acton Health Department when making that decision. And then, in particular for like hockey, one of the challenges over at the rink is that they really can't let more fans in if the players are dressing out in the rink where they have been. So what we're doing is, again, after consultation with the health department, we're going to allow 50% capacity in the locker rooms. So essentially we'll open up 2 locker rooms per team for our hockey games from here on out, so that, the kids can, have some fans at games. I know there were a lot of grandparents who wanted to attend senior nights, things like that. And, we want to try and get as positive of an end of year experience for that as possible. That would also signal kind of a move as we go through the next weeks for other types of audience participation. We're hoping to be able to open up over time as COVID numbers continue to come down. So just want to give you that update. I think we put in additional restrictions as we saw cases rise. As we see cases come back down, we need to think about kind of the exit strategy for those additional restrictions. So, we're going to be thoughtful. We're going to watch the cases and kind of go and trust our advisory team that we have, and, just continue to make progress with COVID. I want to talk a little bit and just speak to, an email you received, because I think it's an important email, to the school committee shell. There was an email from a community member, around gates, and they had been planning to wear some T-shirts in order to celebrate kind of the kickoff of Black History Month. I want to talk to it for a couple of reasons. One, I just want to reiterate, our district and all of our schools have strong support for the Black Lives Matter movement from a social perspective, and it is an important social movement in our country, and we support that certainly. We also understand there's complexity to it, and that it has become politicized in different ways, and there are aspects of it that do venture into the political world. And through all of the educational resources we provide, we certainly don't venture into politics. But, I want to also talk about it for a couple of reasons, because I think, the act of doing this, and I've talked to, the leadership over at Gates, and they wanted me to share this with you. It's been a good learning opportunity for us as a district too, about kind of how we want to plan events and, celebrate different things. I think, one thing that came up was in the process of wanting to celebrate and start Black History Month, a couple things happened. I think, one, by asking students to wear T-shirts, we, kind of had the possibility of pitting, creating an environment where students didn't know whether they should be wearing a T-shirt or not. And we don't necessarily want to do that. But I think, more importantly, I think by also scheduling that on the same days as Lunar New Year, we inadvertently kind of marginalized our Asian students who were celebrating Lunar New Year over at Gates. And one of the conversations that we've had is we really want to make sure that we're celebrating all of our students and all of the cultures in our schools. And so Gates is going to be sending out a follow-up email to families. And, one, they are looking to find ways for next week that they can celebrate Lunar New Year as a school, as a cultural event. And so they're going to be sending out some information about that, about ways that all the students in the school can help celebrate that together. And then as we progress through the week, it was important to our students, and they had come to us with that proposal to try and wear T-shirts, and we want to honor that. But the other aspect of the T-shirt piece that we dug into a little bit more in our conversations was there was a choice, I think, to either wear a Black Lives Matter T-shirt or a black T-shirt. And one of the things that we talked deeply about was the idea of wearing a black T-shirt. And what we don't want to do is ever send a message that there's one color that might represent black. And so they are looking to adjust that plan for students and encourage students to pick a color that they want to find that can celebrate kind of the beginning of Black History Month and let students make some different choices around that with some guidance. So we are making a couple adjustments to that. I just want you to be aware that, even as school leaders, we can continue to learn and we can continue to improve how we do things. And I think it's important to recognize when we have those opportunities, because that's really ultimately what we want for our teachers and it's what we want for our kids. So just to give you that brief update. I'm going to turn it over now to Marie, who is going to talk a little bit about the two principal searches that we have going, which is for Conant and Gates Elementary Schools, because she has some exciting news to share.
Hi, everybody. So we put in your FYI this afternoon the finalist announcements for the principal finalists for both Gates and Conant. I'm going to give you kind of the summary quickly. And this news went out to the faculty this afternoon. It will go out to parents at 7:30. So we're thrilled to say that we've reached finalist levels for both Conant and Gates. Those finalists will be visiting next week. And we hope to have an appointment for both schools within a couple of weeks. So Gates has 3 finalists. I'll give you a brief summary of each of them, but there's a little more detail in the announcement. So one finalist for Gates is Alison Warren. She is the current assistant principal at Gates. She's been the assistant principal at Gates for 2 years, and she was the assistant principal at RJ Gray Junior High for 13 years before that. So she's been with our district for 15 years, and she has a long history of teaching and being a department leader in special education in Texas before that. We have Patricia English Sands. Patricia is the vice principal. Education team facilitator for 6 years and a vice principal for the last 4 years. She also spent many years as a special education teacher. And third, we have Dr. Franklin Rothwell. Dr. Rothwell is the current principal of the Brophy Elementary School in Framingham, and he has been in that role for 12 years. Before that, he was the vice principal of Framingham High School and had many years as a social studies history teacher in high schools and department leader. So 3 highly qualified finalists for Gates. And over at and one more thing about Gates, they will be visiting next week. We will have a community forum on Zoom next Wednesday evening, February 2nd. So you all are welcome to participate in that, as well as parents, staff, and anybody who would like to.
Marie, your sound is
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Tell me if that happens. For some reason, I'm having some audio issues, which I was hoping I had fixed. So next Wednesday evening will be the community forum for Gates from 7 to 8:30 in the evening. We will send out the Zoom link and invitations to that. Over at Conant, we have 4 finalists. So the first finalist is Jennifer Chen Fine. Jennifer is the assistant principal in Burlington at the Marshall Simons Middle School. She's been in that role for 3 years. She was also a resident principal in Boston at an elementary school and a middle school, and she taught mathematics in Newton for many years, and we're excited to have her. The second finalist at Conant is Patricia English Sands. She happens to be a finalist for both schools, and she is, again, the vice principal of the Baker School in Brookline. The third finalist is Beth Feliciano. Beth is an English language educator.
You cut out.
Marie?
Is the principal of the
Marie,
Lincoln.
Would you just mind starting over again with Elizabeth Feliciano, please?
Sorry about that. Thank you. Beth Feliciano is an English language educator in Andover Public Schools, and we're thrilled to have her. And Danielle Morrissey is the principal of the Lincoln Elliott School in the Newton Public Schools. She's been in that role for 5 years, and she was a principal in Boston for 5 years before that, and has a strong background in curriculum. So those are our 4 finalists. I know you're going to ask. 2 of the 4 finalists at Conant are candidates of color, so we're really excited about that. And both committees had anti-bias training and hiring and really good discussions about how important this is. So hey, you can't hear me?
We're back again.
Did you hear all 4 finalists?
We did, and we heard the committee went through anti-bias training and that it was a very important project.
Thank you. So the community forum for Conant will be on Monday evening, February 7th, from 6:30 to 8:30. And again, the invitations will go out. All are welcome. So I just want to thank all of the faculty, parents, administrators who participated in the search committees. We've met weekly since November. We did extensive advertising and recruiting, and we're really excited about the quality of our finalists.
So I'll just jump in there and thank Marie for all of the work with the hiring teams. Hiring committees are hours and hours and hours of time and energy with a group of people. Marie leads many of our hiring teams. I just also want to thank all the members of those 2 screening committees, because those are all volunteers that do this just because they care so deeply about that school community. So thank you so much for all of the time that all of our volunteers put in for those screening groups. Marie said we're working into finalist processes there. I also just want to update you that I met with the staff at RJ Gray today as kind of the start of the process for kicking off the hiring process over at RJ Gray. We are going to be going out to post that position at the beginning of the week and are engaging in a full search process around next principal of RJ Gray. As I have thought about kind of how I want to approach appointments, it has been important to me. I think, just as I go through this role and learn more about, what I want to do as this role, I actually think it's important to try and be consistent and run search processes. I think for a few reasons. One, as we have candidates that may rise to the level of being appointed who might be internal, it allows them to really, for themselves and for the community, to know that they earned it. And that they've gone through that process, risen, and end up getting appointed to something. It also provides a higher level of stakeholder buy-in once someone is appointed permanently, to know that someone has gone through the process and they have really confirmed that they are the best person out there. And then, I think third, if we have a commitment to hiring a more diverse educator workforce and leadership workforce, then we're going to have to continually make sure that we have open processes and solicit, more resumes and more applicants so that we can really go through a process. So I talked with the staff over at the junior high about that today. I have talked with Jim Marcotte about that. He, very much actually agrees that, it's really important even for internal candidates to go through that process. So that they can, make sure that the community is really supportive of the direction. So we're going to be posting that position Monday, and in very short order, we're going to be, updating Douglas about, next steps in that search process. So that's, more to come in terms of steps on Douglas, but I wanted to kind of let you know where we are overall in the process of hiring our next group of leaders.
Thanks, Peter. Anything else for your update?
That is it for the superintendent's update tonight.
All right. Any questions or comments from the committee on Peter's update? None. Okay, I do see a member. Oh, someone's got their hand up. Evelyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Peter and Maria and the team for putting in the work to find some diverse candidates. It's really heartwarming. It doesn't always mean that they're gonna end up getting hired, but at least we demonstrate that we're making the effort to get to get a bigger pool of candidates into the district. So I really appreciate the work that you put into this, and I personally just want to thank each one of you because I know it's not that easy. So,
Thanks, Evelyn. Yeah, and I'll take the opportunity also to celebrate the win. You know, we've had a lot of tough things over the past few years, and I think that this is a really strong showing from a really great group of candidates, including those of color. For me, that's a win, and we should take the moment to celebrate that. So thank you. Okay, I see Carmine has their hand up. If this pertains to the superintendent's update, please go ahead and unmute yourself, and you're welcome to make a comment.
Excuse me for interrupting. I assumed on the agenda was the discussion of the mascot change.
Yes, that's at the end, item G, so it's right towards the end.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. I'll join in at that time.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, moving on to our presentations for this evening. I'm going to hand it over to Dawn, it looks like, to talk us through the AB protocols for responding to incidents involving hate or bias.
Thank you, Adam. All right, do I have the right view up?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, good evening, everyone. This has been a long time in coming, and I'll show you a little roadmap of where we've been in our protocols for responding to incidents of hate or bias. So in 2019, Nayoung Amy Kwan, who is the director of Duke's Asian American Studies program, issued this statement following a discriminatory incident that happened on Duke's campus. And she said, "It is not the responsibility of our students to expose themselves to further danger and injury in their time of need and vulnerability. It is our responsibility in positions of leadership and power with adequate resources to make effective changes on their behalf." And this quote speaks to why we developed a protocol to address incidents of hate and bias in our school community. And more importantly, it speaks to the importance of our responsibility when an incident of hate or bias occurs, and to the district's ongoing work to make each of our schools places where all of our students, our staff, and our families feel a sense of belonging. So there's a few pieces of this. First of all, I wanted to give you a couple definitions. So bias motivated behavior is conduct, direct oral expression, could be a physical gesture as well, or another action that are motivated by a person's bias against someone's membership in a protected group. So that could be race, that could be ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, disability. And those behaviors really serve to interfere with that individual's sense of safety, or it could actually be so significant that it impacts their education and the environment in which they're working. So these behaviors might include using a slur or an insult towards a student or their family, posting pictures or text messages that disparage an individual, or imitating somebody with a disability, for example, or imitating somebody's culture or their language. And as a public school district, it's critical that we affirm that any form of bias-motivated behaviors is unacceptable. These behaviors often have negative effects on students, staff, our school leaders, and our community, and they can impact the engagement of our students and our school climate. And that impact can actually extend beyond that target to members of the targeted groups in the larger community. So it was critical for us to create clear protocols for our teams and our buildings to be able to use when we have bias or hate motivated incidents. So this protocol has been a while in coming. Each one of these represents one of the little pieces and parts. With the district strategy, this falls within the district strategy, the inclusive practices goal. One of our action steps was to publish administrative protocols to provide greater transparency around what we do. And as we developed and honed them, you'll see that we reached out to a whole bunch of different groups. Let me get all the pieces of the map up here. So you can see that we reached out to a number of different individuals. You'll see where COVID-19 sort of, hit there in the middle. It should probably just be across like half the screen right now. But you can see in the top that between November of this year and of 2021 and then January of this year, we requested input from a variety of stakeholder groups and a number of student groups, which was incredibly important to us throughout the process. And so here we are in January 22 with the published protocols. And that's what we're working on to share with you tonight. So the protocol itself is a fairly, it's a comprehensive document. Our teams have been using it. As we've responded over the last year, we have been using the protocol, and that's helped to also help us inform sort of where it ended up. And we're committed to maintaining a school environment where all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. So the protocol is designed to ensure a safe and supportive learning environment. It's to maintain trust with our stakeholders, to seek justice for targets and survivors while avoiding blame and shame, to educate all of our students, especially potential perpetrators, and also to promote healing and a strong sense of school climate and community. There are 6 sections of the protocol, and I'm just going to share a brief overview of each one of them. So the first section is ensuring the safety of the individuals within the school. That's our first priority whenever any incident happens. And so the very first thing is to separate offenders from targets and ensure the immediate safety of the school. Then right away, we move into a phase where we're looking at protective and supportive interim measures to the target and to ensure that they feel safe and supported. If we suspect a crime has occurred, then we certainly notify the police and involve them. We also obviously involve central office leaders throughout it. And then the principal convenes the building response team. So think about the incident, talk about next steps, the investigation and what it's going to look like, and then some of the initial communication. The second set of the protocol looks to communicating the incident. So in this place, the buildings work closely with central office to communicate any communication that, to coordinate communication that comes out. And it's really critical for us that with incidents that are especially public, that the communication happens as quickly as possible. We know that rumors and misinformation can travel really quickly within the community. And so it's important for us to the extent possible, get out in front of it and sort of help inform folks with the information that we're able to share or that we know even at that time. And it's also important that the communication comes from the highest folks in the organization. So it will come from a principal and the superintendent typically, because it needs to convey the importance of it to all of the stakeholders. And then in our initial communication and in our ongoing communication with stakeholders, we always denounce the act of hate or bias. We provide as many details as we can. We speak to the investigation, and we also try and provide some sort of a time frame. And obviously, it's critical for us to, at that point to also reiterate our core values as a school community. So over the last few years, we've done a lot of work, especially at the high school, to ensure that our students know about the ways that they can report any incidents. And above all, we stress to them that they need to reach out to a trusted adult, whether that's at school or at home, or in their faith community, wherever it is we want them to be able to reach out. They've also, at the high school, we have an anonymous reporting system that certainly has helped us with a number of incidents and being aware of them and students feeling like they can come forward. And at the junior high, they will be launching that the week after next as well to their students with in concert with some of their work about anti-bullying. We also investigate the incident. And this is the part that I think is the part that we can't really talk a lot about publicly, and the part that tends to be the most frustrating for folks, because there's very little information that we're able to share publicly about this other than the fact that we're investigating. So we conduct interviews, we gather evidence, we communicate with law enforcement if that's appropriate, we respond to stakeholders as we can with relevant information. And then when we complete our investigation, we have a written report with a determination if there's disciplinary processes that are included. And all throughout this, of course, we're considering restorative practices and continuing education that needs to happen, whether that's on the part of students or staff or both. And The fourth part of the protocol is the school-based support. And so our school-based response teams have principals, assistant principals, counselors and psychologists, teachers, the athletic director. There's a whole number of folks on the one at the high school, for instance. And so our team works to identify targets and members of the school community who also may need additional support. We talk about a plan to follow up with the identified individuals. So that includes the target, the perpetrator, families, witnesses, bystanders, upstanders. We update safety plans if those are needed for the targets that we had established right away in the beginning. And then we develop support plans for other folks that have been involved or that have indicated they need some support. And finally, an incident of hate or bias, particularly one that is public, can substantially impact the school, and it can manifest itself in divisions among our stakeholder groups. Our school teams have to consider ways to promote healing and a sense of unity after an incident. And it's really important to engage our stakeholders at the conclusion of the investigation to provide accurate information about it and dispel misinformation and rumors. Although there will likely be considerable information regarding specific students and specific actions taken, that's all confidential information that won't be released, which I know can be frustrating to some. So the goal is to certainly protect privacy rights, but also be able to share with the community to the extent that it's possible to share with them the incident. So the final section of this protocol has resources for staff and families to use. And it's posted on our website on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion section under Responding to Incidents of Hate or Bias. It's also translated into a few different languages for folks, and anybody can hopefully access it and find it easily. That is our goal, that it's out there. So with that, I will turn it over to any questions the committee or others might have.
Thank you, Dawn. Any questions or comments from the committee? John.
Thank you very much. That was, wonderfully laid out. And you've actually spoken to the point that I'm going to raise, but, it's such a challenge for the community. I'm hoping you and Peter could share some additional thoughts. And that's, the tension between the need to protect the privacy and rights of the student and respect confidentiality, and the desire, to explain to people what happened and the actions that we took. And I know from the incidents that have occurred, recently that people just struggle with this over and over again. So I hope you could say a little bit more about, how we can assure everybody that we have thoughtfully walked that line.
So I have a couple thoughts, and then I'm sure Peter wants to chime in too. So I was able to meet with the World of Difference students about a month ago, and about this particular protocol to get their feedback. And that was the part that frustrates them the most. They're like, well, we see kids back in school, and why are they back in school? And did they get a punishment? What was it? And so we talked a lot about confidentiality and how we have certain laws that we have to follow as school administrators. And then we spent a lot of time talking about the follow-up. And so that's a piece that I know I've really been focusing on and working with our principals who've been phenomenal around the follow-up. And a lot of times in the past, we've gone through the investigation, but we haven't necessarily submitted anything in writing to anybody to sort of say, our investigation's over, this is what we found, and here's how we're moving forward. And I think just the written piece of that has helped tremendously this year with even just disciplinary incidents with families, because while they may not necessarily agree with or be pleased with the entirety of the results, they still feel like, okay, they did the investigation, they thought about what they needed to think about. And so I think some of it is, and that's for me, part of that transactional trust that we're building with folks along the way to say, look, we said we were going to investigate, we investigated. And then the next step now, and Joni's working on that, for example, with her team now at the high school to get back with students. And she's gotten some really great feedback from students about communication and what's important to them. And how often they need to hear. Sometimes they're like, yeah, no, we don't need to hear about all that kind of stuff. But they want to hear that, yes, we did. If you have any more information, please share with us. Please come forward. And, at this time, the investigation is over and, consequences and whatever restorative justice were, issued as appropriate. So we're trying to get really better about keeping students informed all along the way about the process, because I think if they understand the process, they at least feel like, okay, they're moving through the steps. And so I know that that's happening and occurring.
I'm happy to offer a couple thoughts too. I think, one of the things we think about a lot is, when it's appropriate to send a communication out about an incident. It's always hard as a school district because you are balancing, oftentimes, the need to communicate about something with, the sensitivity that there are students involved. And that makes things complicated. I think one of the things that we need to continue to improve upon is thinking about how different incidents have impact on individuals and communities within our communities. Because how we respond in a situation like that says a lot about our values, and how we might not respond says a lot about our values and our commitment to those values and our support for students. I think one thing we've learned is that different parts of our communities who have been minoritized over time, whether it's a swastika drawn on, a bathroom stall, or whether it's hate speech directed at someone or other symbols that are put up, there's a repeated trauma that comes with that our students experience every day. And that has a really significant long-term impact on how they engage with school. And so the challenge for schools, when something is sufficiently public that it becomes community-wide and known in the community, if the school can't recognize what that is and talk about our own values in relation to what's going on, and make sure that people know that those aren't behaviors that we can tolerate and that we're aware and acting on it, then that really sends a really strong negative message to members of our community who are impacted by these things. And so, we often think about kind of the trauma, and as educators, we're always thinking about every child, and we're often thinking about, the hurt of, maybe a student's involved in an incident and where you as a district are sending out an email about this. But sometimes we also lose sight of the hurt that's caused to different members of our community as well. And I think we need to make sure that we're really keeping centered in our thinking the thoughts and needs of students who, and families who have been traditionally marginalized in our district, because they really need the support and they need us to continue to consider them. So, John, I hope that spoke a little bit to that.
Yes, I think it did. And I think, everybody who's been involved in these issues with confidentiality, and I think the same things come up, in executive session. It's a struggle because there's part of it which you'd love to be able to share so people could understand better, and there are times when you simply can't share things. So I think continuing to be honest about that tension, and knowing that we're working hard, as you say, to support everyone in our community, and to show how much we do in fact care about everyone in the community, while at the same time not being able to share every detail of some of the things that are going on. That's just, we're going to have that discussion over and over again. And so I appreciate you taking some time to go through it now.
Thanks. Evelyn.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for providing that additional perspective. Just two things that I wanted to mention was that I think that the report back to parents is very important, but we need to think about the way we structure that information, because of the confidentiality guidelines that we follow, which we should. I'm not saying here that we shouldn't. Some of the information can be so superficial, it can be insulting to the recipient family. So thinking about a way to structure the information that makes sense. Whether or not it's palatable to hear or not, it's something that we need to know. And so putting it in a way that does not minimize people's intelligence is important. The other comment that I wanted to make is a psychosocial support for the kids involved, whether the kid is the victim or the perpetrator. We need to think about that because re-traumatizing, as Peter has said, is an issue. And so how do we conduct these investigations where kids are distrustful, especially kids of color, of the persons conducting the investigation, but pulling them out of class to do it, and involving resource officers or whatever, the police, whatever, however the investigation is conducted, that can be traumatic to these kids. So we have to think about the way we structure these interviews and how the impact it has on the kids and how we can adequately support them.
Yeah, thank you, Evelyn. That's a great point.
Thanks, Evelyn. Andrew.
Thanks. And I really appreciate the presentation and the policy, excuse me, that's going forward. But one question that comes to me, though, is that this is a way to deal with incidents and their consequences. I mean, sometimes they're couched in words, not pointed enough, or potentially can be easily sloughed off once a punishment's given. But really, my question has to do with how do we stop these things from happening through education? We've seen that as we get further from the Holocaust, for example, the fewer people believe just how horrific it was. And that's one example of one set of bias. It's something that can only be rectified by education. I would hope that we're looking at both sides of an incident, not just to ensure that there are consequences and learning opportunities after somebody does something that they shouldn't do, but also to do as much as possible to show that they shouldn't happen in the first place.
Yeah, I can speak to that with, the work that I do with the high school team.
Yeah.
And the fact that we, and to Evelyn's point about the psychosocial supports, we have a counselor and a psychologist who sits through, and actually two counselors. And honestly, that and the interim measures are the very first place that people want to go, which is so awesome and exactly where they need to be in terms of the targets. And then also the perpetrators and other witnesses and bystanders and members of the affected group. I also, like last time I was struck by, the social studies department chair is one of the folks who sits on our team at high school. And we were talking about this latest incident with the N-word. And we were talking about, where in the curriculum does this happen? And, Deb's been thinking deeply about that work as well. And we're looking at it. And even just expanding our libraries at the elementary school and starting to have conversations, really open, honest conversations in our classrooms about race and about bias in ways that that's age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and where kids feel supported with all the questions that they have about this. I think that it will ultimately pay off. But I think it's one of those, and it's life work. It's the type of work that takes years in an institution like ours, which wasn't built for people who don't look like you and me. And so for our communities of color and our people of color, we have to really think about all of the structures and the systems and our policies and our procedures and whether they're really, really supporting all of our students. And so I think it's a combination of a lot of things.
The one thing that stops these incidents from happening is the culture around the community wanting this to stop, meaning that everyone stops all of the microaggressions and find ways to be able to stand up to the people who are pushing them out.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Nora.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and I was just really pleased to see the emphasis on restorative justice and really understanding the incidents when they happen are teaching opportunities for everybody who's involved in a real, not just culture building, but also just a place of learning for all of the students. And one part that I found myself wondering about was, I guess the part of when an incident happens in a school or as part of a school, when it's determined whether or not that's criminal, and then how that might be reported. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion in the community lately about school resource officers. And so I was just wondering, when does something cross that line from being a school disciplinary issue to a criminal issue? And what are thoughts around how that's sort of handled, I guess, to be protective of students?
Peter, I know you've done a lot of work with the SROs and with our DEI family group. I know for me, it's if we think there's been a crime committed during the act of some sort, then we would involve the police or the school resource officer at that point. For instance, when there was graffiti on the trailer in the lower fields, clearly that was a crime that was committed, and so we involved school resource officers. But they're certainly not involved in every incident. Peter, did you have something though to say more about that?
I'll say I think sometimes we get this question in investigations, like at what point is something a hate crime versus hate language or biased language, and I think the number one definition I go back to is when something's a hate crime, it means there has to be some criminal behavior that's involved as well. It could be assaultive behavior. It could be verbal. When I say assaultive, verbal assault can constitute that as well. But it could be, vandalism often in these types of incidents is a key component of it. And so, we do have an MOU with the police that says if we know of a crime that involves our schools, then we're going to report it to them. So, those are instances where we, make that report to the police. I will say, I know our police in particular try to do everything they can to also use restorative practices. They've actually been using restorative practices for a number of years, and I believe they use the Center for Restorative Justice, which is a local, organization that is very skilled in this. So that, is the first response that our police have and our SROs have, is to try the restorative route. But, we also know that, parents involved in those cases don't give up rights either, and that can be particularly challenging. So does that kind of get to the heart of what you're thinking, Nora?
It does. I mean, I guess I've been reading and thinking a lot about just people's concerns about a school resource officer, and does that criminalize behavior more often than it would if we didn't have a resource officer in the building. And so, knowing that we're dealing with our adolescents or even younger students, I just was struck by that part. And I know we also have a responsibility, though, if it is a criminal act, not to, sort of look away from that. So I knew that you guys would have been very thoughtful about that and thoughtful about how that process happens. But I think it's something that parents can be concerned about, when their child's behavior at school might involve the police, and when it would rather be seen as a school disciplinary issue.
Sure. It's definitely a complicated issue, and I think it's on the top of a lot of communities' minds right now, what to do about that. I, think it's pretty complex and nuanced, and I think of, a number of positive roles that our officers serve, and I think, even our officers would say there are students within the high school that they wish they could continue to have better relationships with and connect with. So, I think it's complicated.
Thank you.
I also, the students had a lot of questions about that too, Nora, when I met with them in the groups, and that was why there's like 2 or 3 pages in the beginning of the protocol with definitions, because they really were sort of hung up on it. They were calling everything a hate crime. And so we were unpacking that language a little bit and talking more about it. And so we committed to some of those definitions together because it made sense to them, and it made sense to them. Also, I will say that, as somebody who's involved a lot with a number of investigations at the high school, the school resource officer is usually it's school administrators dealing with our students, and the resource officer is there certainly for support, but I've not really been, they haven't been involved in the last few, I know that. So I know that people are also on the leadership team very sensitive to, community concerns, and making sure that we're only using involvement of our SROs when it makes sense and it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? We do have one member of the public, Chuck Pollock. you are all set. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Very good, thank you. My name is Chuck Pollock of 8 Hosmer Street in Acton, and I'm an AB parent. With me also is Jamie Formaggio of 17 Thoreau Road, who's also an Acton resident and a parent of an AB graduate. We're here tonight as co-presidents of Congregation Beth Elohim in Acton, which is a local center for Jewish life, learning, and worship. We'd like to thank the school community and Assistant Superintendent Dawn Bentley for developing the protocols for responding to hate or bias, which she presented here tonight. It's particularly gratifying to see that current students and faculty from various affinity groups were involved in their development. They are the experts in how bias and hate manifest in schools and can best say whether the steps taken are effective in addressing a particular situation. The 5 steps in the protocols, addressing safety, reporting, investigation, support for the targeted person, and engaging stakeholders, are on point. But the details of how these steps are done matter. In particular, you've recognized the importance of supporting the person or persons targeted, but the nature of the support is not clearly detailed. Support for and empowerment of the targeted person or persons is of the utmost importance in the process. A targeted student will recover best if they have some say in the next steps. So we suggest the following. A student who's been targeted should be offered guidance from an adult in the same targeted group who can accompany them during the investigation and follow-up. This adult may be either of a school staff member or a community volunteer. And even when the perpetrator remains unknown, the target of the offense needs the opportunity to heal. For example, the targeted person or persons could benefit from a say in how the damaged property, for example, is made right again in the case of hate graffiti. We would also like to emphasize that communication with stakeholders is vital throughout the process, and we're encouraged to see it given the importance it has in Section 5 of the protocol. Members of the Congregation Beth Elohim community are stakeholders, and we view ourselves as partners in this work, and we hope that you will see us as such. We'd like to encourage the incident response team to reach out regularly to affected communities, not only about specific incidents, but also to ensure that these protocols remain up to date and sensitive to evolving language and tactics of anti-Semitism, racial hate and bias, homophobia, and misogyny. Thank you again for your hard work. We know that this is not easy. Let us continue to join together to fight anti-Semitism, racism, and all types of hate and bias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And I feel like it was hard for me to put the word final on this document because I don't think it's final. And I really see it as something that is going to continue to evolve as we learn more and know more. And so this is fantastic feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kyra.
I just want to put a punctuation point on something that Chuck just said, which was to have volunteers of the targeted group be part of that process of healing. So I want to emphasize that and say thank you for that. I think that that's a brilliant idea. And so while Congregation Beth Elohim should absolutely be part of that partnership, I hope that you will also recruit African American parents who live in this community, Chinese American parents who live in this community, Latino parents who live in this community. That is essential. It's mission critical. It's so important. So please do not don't bury that part. That might actually be the thing that makes this whole entire document sing. So thank you so much, Chuck, for reading that and for bringing that to this table, because I hadn't thought of it, and I really want to see that implemented.
Thanks, Kyra. Ben.
I just wanted to say thank you with gratitude to Kyra for including all groups in all synagogues within this community. Temple Beth Elohim is just one of many different congregations within a 15-mile radius of Acton. So to include all groups, all affected groups is so important. And thank you with gratitude, Kyra.
Thanks. Evelyn.
I just wanted to say thanks to Chuck and for speaking about this. And I echo Kyra's sentiments that maybe this is the strategy that we can actually help to sensitize our community to be more accepting of other people, because some of this that we're experiencing in school is what we're experiencing in the community. And if we can't fix both, we will continue to see it in the school. So to the extent that we can pull all the various stakeholders together to make this happen, I think that would be, and I had not thought about this myself, so thank you all for thinking about this and bringing this in front of the school committee. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, any final questions or comments? Okay, we will move on now to the Health Insurance Trust overview. John Petersen will be driving the presentation this evening on this one. And he promised me he'd be done in, what was it, 3 minutes, John?
You know, what Adam is trying to explain is that if, let's see if I can just get myself to slideshow. There we go. That if I was quick, there would be lots of discussion and a lively, conversation. But let me begin by thanking Adam and Peter for providing this time to talk about the Health Insurance Trust. I think it's very, timely, as we're at a critical part of the budget process, and health insurance is in fact a significant component of the budget, as well as a driver of the increase in this year's budget. What I'm going to go through are the objective of the trust. I'm going to talk a little bit about the plans that we offer. Then what does the trust actually do? What decisions do we make? I'll describe the operation of the trust, and then we're going to come to the piece that Amy is waiting for. It's like, so how are you guys doing? What's going on with your financial performance? I want to start out by being clear. When people talk about insurance, all of a sudden they start to talk about insurance. Insurance is never really the objective. In this case, the objective that the trust shares with the district and our employees is that what we're really looking for is good health care. And we want to find a way to do that cost effectively. And the group that we're covering consists of about 300 individuals and about 550 families and about 600 retirees. And of course, we've talked about the retirees from time to time. Dave just refers to that as OPEB. So you should make that connection between our retiree healthcare and OPEB right here. In terms of the Board of Trustees, there are two representatives for the school, Margaret Dennehy and myself. There are two representatives for the town, Steve Barrett and Himajan Agareddy, and the Acton Finance Committee is represented by Steve Noon. It's also very important to recognize that the school contributes significantly to the trust meetings. Marie Altieri and Dave Verdolino are always there. There is also some clerical support for the trust that is very important. In terms of the plans that we offer, we have two HMOs, two HSAs, and we also are legally required to offer a PPO. So that's a very small part of our offering, but it is something that is managed by the trust. And then lastly, we have the retiree healthcare, which is the MEDEX program, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Now, for people who know too much, there are a few little details that I'm leaving out as we go through. Feel free to bring those up in questions. So what do we do? The most important decision of the trust is the one that we have just completed, which is to set our rates for FY23. The other thing that's important to understand about the trust is that the trust is self-insured. So when Blue Cross and Harvard Pilgrim are doing things, and we'll come to this on the next slide, they are just passing the claims along to us to pay, along with their administrative fee. But we ultimately are responsible for payments. So for example, when the government mandated that COVID tests would be covered, that came right back to the trust. The government said, you're going to cover this. And that, again, hit the trust's bottom line. The purpose of reinsurance is to protect against catastrophic loss. So the way this is set up is we have a limit like $150,000. And then once somebody has more than $150,000 in a calendar year, then that amount above $150,000 is covered by reinsurance. We also set some calendar year insurance rates. MEDEX runs on the calendar year, not the fiscal year. In order for the trust to operate, we need consulting services. This is a complicated business. We select a consultant in May. For many years, Cook and Company has provided those services, and we're a significant financial operation, so we do undergo an annual audit, which also has recently been completed. It's important to understand the relative roles of the trust, and the town and the schools. The trust does not design insurance plans, so those plans are negotiated by the town and the schools. And what the trust does is we simply set the rates to implement those plans. I wanted to just, run the money around this chart quickly so people would understand, how money flows. So if you start with me in the lower left, we have employees in the town and the schools. And the employees make an insurance payment to the trust, and the town and the schools make an insurance payment to the trust. Now, the employees also go to visit various service providers. And from those service providers, they get services, and they also have additional payments. So for people who are concerned about healthcare costs, you can't just look at the premium and say that's all the money that's involved in our employees. There are also these copays. The service providers then send claim descriptions to the plan administrator, said, oh, so-and-so had cataract surgery. And then the plan administrator has negotiated rates with the various service providers, and they pay, that negotiated rate back to the service provider. At that point, the approved claim comes back to the trust, and that comes back with a administrative fee. And so then we pay back to the plan administrators the claim plus that administrative fee. So that's how the money sort of runs around in a circle. To just look at the recent year, and you're going to see that I've got sort of two different kind of numbers. These are the cash flow numbers. So they're not going to tie to our audited financials. But on a cash flow basis for 21, we had town and school contributions of $12.5 million. We had employee contributions of $3.8 million. So if the math is right, that should be 75-25. And we had retiree contributions of $1.2 million. And then the retiree contributions are matched 50-50. So it's $1.2 million from retirees and $1.2 million from the school. So total revenue of $17.5 million. On the expense side, we had claims of our cost at total was $19.8 million. The claims were $19.3 million. We had administrative fees of about $1 million. So you can see that's about, our administration is costing about 5% of the actual claim. And then, we had a reinsurance policy, but that reinsurance policy actually, we paid, about $1 million, and we got about $1.5 million back. So we actually made money on reinsurance. And what I would like everybody to take away from that is, so these people that offered us reinsurance, they're smart people. This is what they do for a living. And in spite of that, it was not their goal to lose $500,000 when they issued this policy. This speaks to the challenge of, dealing with the variability in healthcare costs. So to continue on that theme, if you look at the last 10 years of the trust and say, well, how have our expenses changed year over year? You can see starting in FY13, that was a great year. Our expenses actually went down almost 5%. The next year, they went up 1%. So if you were a trustee at that point in time, you're thinking, this isn't such a hard job. We're in pretty good shape. Costs are under control. And then in FY15, you were greeted with a 15% increase in our claims expenses. The trust at that point in time, and you'll see what the reaction was later, said, oh, wow, we better raise rates. We, are really experiencing inflation. Well, what actually happened in FY16 and FY17? Our expenses didn't go up. They went down, 4.5% and 3.5% 2 years in a row. In FY18, it went back the other direction, and you can follow this on down to FY21, where you can see we were up 14%, which brought us to the current situation. That year-to-year volatility is what you would expect in a small group of our size. What you can see is if you average these numbers over 3 years, a lot of the volatility goes away. And if you average them over an even longer time period, the volatility goes away. So if you look actually at that 5-year column and say, how has the health insurance trust been doing on average in terms of the rate at which our expenses are growing? We've been doing okay. You can see that from these 5 years averages, it's sort of in that 3 to 4% range, which is aligned with inflation. And for people who have followed healthcare costs in Massachusetts, we're in good shape. For people who like graphs, and I would be in this category, you can see here in red we have expenses. And the years that we just talked about, if you find FY15, you can see that period where we had a sharp jump up, and then the cost just went flat for a number of years. And you can see the trustees in blue said, well, we need more revenue, but of course we overshot. And the consequence of that is the green line. You can see the unrestricted assets of the trust built up until in FY18, there were almost $8 million in unrestricted assets. Well, that was beyond what the trust can keep through its bylaw, and so we had to reduce rates, bringing us to the current situation where we ended FY21 with about $3 million in unrestricted assets. And so on this slide, here's the rate history. You can see the rates for the individual plans, the HMO and the HSA, and our PPO, and you can see the rate increases year over year. So you can see that 2015, strong reaction of the trustees to the large increase in expenses, and the year afterwards they were still skittish. So they raised rates again, with the consequence being that then there were several years of very benign rates. And that, of course, coincides with the time a lot of you have been on the committee where there was, really, a very small impact of healthcare costs on the budget. But then starting, this last year in FY22, we increased rates 6%. And then looking at where we were, the conclusion of the trust was that we needed to increase rates by 10% for FY23. And that was, guidance we provided earlier, and then that was affirmed at our meeting last week. So to look at this in just, one more way, again, you can see in the graph, the increase in our unrestricted assets and then the decrease in our unrestricted assets. What the trust looked at in terms of that FY23 rate setting process, we said, well, we ended, FY21 with $3.2 million in unrestricted assets, which is okay. That's not a bad place to be. But we're halfway through FY22, and the consensus of the trustees is we think in FY22 we're going to wind up losing about $1 million. So that means our year-end fund balance will be about $2.2 million. And you can see, if you look at that, profit loss column, there have been years where we have lost more than $2.2 million. So that, is not a balance that the trust is at all comfortable with. And so the conclusion was, we needed that strong increase in rates in order to protect the solvency of the trust. This was a really quick look at the trust. It is just an overview. We have, over the course of the last 3 years, put up all of our agendas, minutes, and all of the supporting documents that the trust uses, including the annual financial audits, the annual cash flows, and other documents that are helpful. I have to confess, I had hoped to update for this meeting my trust overview memo. It's a little bit aged. It's from 2018 right now. I do commit to Adam that he will get an updated memo for the current year before I am done. And then I want to close by saying I did a little research for this presentation, and I went to Quote Investigator, and it turns out that this prediction is very difficult, especially about the future, which, like a lot of these quotations has been ascribed to various parties, actually is probably best ascribed to Robert Storm Petersen. We note that he spells Petersen correctly. It is all E's. And the history of this, it actually ties back to a Danish proverb. And since, I have actually 7/16 Danish in me, I feel very well connected to this concept of the difficulty of prediction. So I have no idea what you're going to ask because I can't predict that, but I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, John. All right. Any questions for John? Evelyn.
I have a question. So, John, 10% is a huge jump. That is going to impact people's pockets. But I have two questions. I know it's difficult to predict. However, what would you say is a comfortable balance for the trust to keep? And then secondly, if we do determine what the comfortable balance is, how can we keep rates or increase rates at a rate where that balance keeps to the point that we want it to be? Because it does seem like things are fluctuating. We've had 8 million, we went down because we didn't want to have that amount of money, and then we go down to 2 million, and then we increase rates. Is there opportunity to do some kind of a predictive analysis and figure out what the right amount would be to keep, and then we can increase rates based on that to keep it to that comfortable amount? Maybe you can draw us some causal loop diagrams next time. That would be great.
So that's an excellent question. And I want to begin by saying that although the future is hard to predict, the past, by comparison, is easy to predict. And so one of the mechanisms for trying to keep the trust on a more even keel is to look back at those multi-year averages, the 3 and 5 year average, and try and follow those curves over time. In order to actually implement that, you still need to have about the right amount of unrestricted assets. And unfortunately, as I've said in many school committee meetings, the trust, this is what we predicted. The actual, will be accurate if it's within $1 million of whatever it is we think we're predicting. And the reason that I spent so much time going through those numbers so everybody could see them is you can see the numbers just bounce around. There's no way to predict, a $2.7 million loss. You just can't do it. So you need to maintain a buffer. And then the other conversation that we've had in the trust is that when we reduced rates, this actually sort of distorted the budgeting process for the school and the town. And we would have been better off to return excess assets in the trust through a rate holiday. So I think, if we were in this position again where we had very large assets, we would in fact go the route of returning those assets to the entities through a holiday, and that would have the impact, and Dave can talk about this, of likely simply letting that money flow to E&D. So the excess reserve sitting in the trust becomes an excess reserve sitting in the school and the town, and then they can manage it as part of their budget process. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's sort of where we are.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Gary, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. John, a couple questions, and depending on the answers, I might dive a little bit into something else. But your first slide, the trustees themselves, leads me to question, is the trust for both Acton and this region? Or is it only for the region?
No, the trust is for the town and for the school district. And through the bylaws, we could add other groups, to the trust. For example, if the town of Boxborough wanted to become part of the trust, we could have that discussion.
Has that ever been approached to them? Because I'm not aware of it.
I don't think so. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is Boxborough part of Minnemanitoba Health Group now?
I don't think so.
Yeah, Marie, do you know?
I think they are. I think they are.
So I know we do Neshoba for Department of Health. Is that what you were talking about?
No, there are other groups like that. So our trust is just these two groups. There are other groups like Minnemanitoba Health Group, which represent other governmental entities. There are maybe 3 or 4 big ones in this area, and we actually do some benchmarking against those other groups to make sure that we think the trust is still the best way forward for the district and for the town.
So what that leads to me to is the first thing you mentioned. I'm questioning why a Boxborough rep isn't on this trust, given we're paying $150,000 plus into the trust. If it's just for the $1 million increase. But the other question would be, how are you differentiating region money from town money in the trust? Because I don't think Boxborough should be paying for Acton medical. And I'm not sure how you're separating that out. Or, I'm not sure you can, but that's, I'm wondering about that.
Well, I think, part of this gets into the whole question of understanding how insurance works. So if you looked at those other larger groups like Minuteman and Neshoba, in any given year, one town may have a bit more claims, and relatively less premium, and another town may have more premium and relatively less claims. The reason that they're banded together is that the belief is over time it will become a wash. So, I have no reason to believe that the claims experience in the town differs particularly from the claims experience, in the region. And so therefore creating this larger pool, which actually helps us in terms of the reduction of volatility, is to the benefit of both the town and the district.
And it might be, and what you're saying makes sense, but again, I get back to whether there should be representation from Boxborough on the trust. I don't know if anybody's interested, but I think it would be nice to have the trust reach out to the town of Boxborough on that.
Well, I'll let Marie in, but I'll say I've tried to attract people to the trust meetings, explaining that the trust meetings are really the most fun meetings you could possibly go to. But for some reason, I just haven't been able to build a big audience. But Marie is always there. So Marie, would you like to add something?
Well, I was just going to say that the money paid into the trust for Acton Boxborough employees comes from the Acton Boxborough budget, obviously, and the representation is through the Acton Boxborough School Committee representative who represents the region.
So does that mean that one member of Boxborough's representative should be on this trust then?
No, I think what it means is that if someone from Boxborough wanted to serve as the representative to the trust, that's fine. Just like, Adam happens to be the chair of the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee. He happens to be from Boxborough. This is not different than that.
I guess the question is, has, again, the trust reached out to Boxborough to ask for a representative? If they have and we haven't responded, that's our mistake.
No, I have not reached out to Boxborough to see what the interest was. And I'll be perfectly honest. I think, if people want to come to the meeting, if they're interested and knowledgeable about health insurance, there is the opportunity to comment because we're not a big group.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Yevon.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, John. Wonderful presentation. So I have a two dumb questions, basically. One is, how is the health trust related to the district budget? Why should I care? So that's one. Second is, what does the 14% increase means on the district budget? What are the implications?
Yeah, so because I didn't want to steal all of Dave's thunder, I didn't show a slide, which would tie the budget detail to the numbers that I presented here. But in the budget detail that Dave and the finance department put together, you can see the sum of the active insurance, and you can see that that is $9+ million, and that it is increasing by 11% in this FY23 budget. And likewise, you can look at that retiree line, which I said, when you see the word retiree in healthcare, what you need to say is, aha, this is OPEB. And you can see that line in there, and you can see, well, Dave says it's more complicated than that, but he can fill that in later. And you can see that that also is increasing by 11%. So those are, and that again is $1 million number. So these are significant contributors to the $100 million budget.
I think the short answer is, yeah, then the 10% increase in the health insurance rates to the district equal $1 million, which equals 1% of our budget. And as Peter presented last meeting, we were at about $2 to $3 million over our anticipated budget for next year. So the health insurance rate increase affects us pretty dramatically, particularly in a tough budget year like this year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
I will hand it over now to Peter and Dave to go through the next iteration of our budget.
All right, so thank you, Adam. So this is built on the previous presentation that you had. So hopefully, I'm going to spend just a couple of moments refreshing your memory of some of the highlights, and then I'm going to get into some of the details that we want to talk about tonight. So just as a reminder, we laid out the calendar for you. We are on the second presentation of this budget. It's called the Superintendent's Recommended Budget. For some reason that someone at some point decided to call it that. I am not really comfortable saying this is a recommended budget yet, because I think we still, I know we still are going to have more work to do even coming out of tonight in order to get to a budget that we know is going to work for the district and also work for the communities. Major dates that we want you to be aware of. And just as a reminder, because Acton has changed its town meeting date, we are being driven on the rest of the budget schedule by the Boxborough town meeting at this point. So where we left off last, the primary net position that we showed at the preliminary net position we showed at the last meeting was a deficit of about $1.8 million. And we had balanced that through a series of cost-saving measures as well as reductions to the budget. Highlights of those reductions are presented here, but we found, a duplicate that was $100,000. That's a big duplicate, but it was there. We also are planning to transfer some costs from our operating budget into ARPA money that would be very appropriate use of ARPA. And then in addition, we looked at 3 levels of reductions over the course of the night with you. Just as a reminder, level 1 reductions included a mix. We had first proposed that we maintain a level use of reserves. The school committee guidelines have been to reduce that. We're proposing that we keep that steady. We also looked at bus drivers, and we were also looking at a reduction of an assistant superintendent position at the district level. So that was about $500,000. We had an additional $500,000 of reductions that looked at a combination of operations programs, some clerical, as well as some teaching positions. And then we also had some additional proposed reductions in Tier 3 that looked at some additional operations positions, possibly pausing the all-day kindergarten tuition reduction and a reduction of about 15% of our allocation for elementary classroom assistants. And that was another $400,000+ of reductions. In terms of changes in FTE, the proposed budget that we presented last time had a preliminary change in FTE of a reduction of about 14.5 total positions. So throughout the course of the meeting and from our community, after the meeting and during the meeting and before the meeting, we heard a variety of feedback. And I just want to summarize some of the main points. From the school committee, we heard that all-day K should continue to be a priority, that we needed someone dedicated to DEI at the district level. There were concerns around any reductions to special education, questions around how will we address students' social emotional needs, and there was an openness, I believe, to considering increased use of ARPA funds and or excess and deficiency, although there was some concern expressed around possible future budget impacts, because we know once we dip into reserves or grant funding, those are one-time funds that eventually do go away. So while they can help solve an immediate problem, in the long term, they're not going to solve those issues. From the community, we also heard some feedback, and I think I grouped it into 3 major areas. 1, tuition for all-day K is a burden to families, particularly coming out of the pandemic. There was strong support for someone at the district level being dedicated to DEI, and there were concern about any reductions to special education. So what we're going to do tonight is dig into a little bit of that feedback and come back to you with some proposals. So we're going to talk a little bit about a proposed change for DEI, proposed special education caseloads and talk about that in a little bit more depth. Funding and revenue. And so if we're making some changes to our proposals, how are we going to pay for that? And then we actually put all day K last because it really needs a deeper discussion. And we're going to present 4 scenarios. We're trying to keep with the magic number that anytime you have a question, we're going to come back at you with 4 options, as Andrew noted in the last meeting. So what we're not talking about tonight is some of the questions around SEL, social emotional learning, and MTSS. There is a finite amount of time that we can plan for in any given meeting. We will be coming back to a more detailed presentation on that during the February 17th budget workshop, but I just want to recognize that that's a question that was asked, but we're not getting to tonight. So in terms of DEI, our original proposal is to reduce 1 position of assistant superintendent of schools, and our updated recommendation that is still a significant cost savings, but we were proposing to restore the DEI role as a director level position. We are anticipating that that person would specialize in DEI. There could be some consideration of social emotional learning as well. I want to talk about difference of a director level position versus an assistant superintendent. I think, our directors of things tend to be more specialists within certain areas and have that focus, whereas an assistant superintendent, by nature of that role and title, has to be very much a generalist and working on with multiple different hats across the district. And oftentimes they're also the person that has to run interference because they are typically, within an area, the last stop before the superintendent of schools. Going in this direction would still require a reorganization of roles within central office. That would have to happen over the course of the spring because that is a significant reorganization. I think one of the things that I would want to do if we choose to go in this direction, I would want to reach out to stakeholder groups before we get too far in the planning for this and kind of hear some feedback around what they think we need and what a possible focus would be, and then think about a hiring process. But, it is, hiring season, particularly for administrative roles, so we have to think about that. We also, if you remember from the previously presented budget, that we had put about $100,000 to $150,000 toward building level leadership for DEI through ARPA. And that's a combination of paying for teacher leadership roles in each building, but also paying for the professional learning necessary to support their development and leadership capacity. So that's something that we would think about. And I think the 2 ideas here would be designed to play together. In terms of special education, I feel very, very badly. Jen Truslow became ill over the last 24 hours, and she is not able to do this tonight. So you are going to get a very, very, very distant second in me presenting the special education. I am going to say, and admit that I will be limited in this. And if I can't answer questions tonight, then we will certainly be able to come back to this in another meeting. We're very open to your feedback and direction that you want to go. I don't think any reduction comes easily for us. And I want to note, in particular in special education, we've really worked hard over the last few years to build a program and work toward a program that we can all really be proud of and that we believe serves our students really well. I think what we're dealing with at this point isn't a value decision because our value is certainly to keep funding, in all of these areas. I think what we're dealing with is an economics decision of how can we make sure we're providing a good, high quality education in a means that the communities can afford. And so, if at the end of this you feel strongly that we want to put that position back in the budget, we can find that dollar value somewhere. But what we did feel obligated to do was show you exactly what we were looking at to make our thinking transparent, even if you think it's flawed. So numbers don't tell the whole story in special education. Special education, when we talk about caseloads, oftentimes that can be confused that all we're talking about are the size or numbers of students that a teacher might be serving. Caseloads, I think, to us and to me in particular, are a combination of factors, but it's how many students might a teacher serve, but what are the needs of the students? We listed the enrollment of each school just so you have a general sense of the size of each school. And then what we did is, total all of the students in each school who have IEPs. I want to note that the numbers in this column are a combination of students who are in programs, and programs serve students with specific and higher needs, and students in learning centers who often have very diverse learning needs. And so what we're talking about in the next two columns are going to be specific to learning centers. Through the budgeting process, we think of our programs a little differently from our learning centers because they serve such a specific population of students. We are not considering any reductions to those. In all honesty, that's something that we have to evaluate on an annual basis, the needs of staffing in our programs, and make sure that we make appropriate adjustments as needed. And over the years, you've seen us make some shifts with assistants or other types of staff in and out of programs based on where student needs are. What we did look at, though, are the number of learning center teachers in each school relative to the number of students. You can get a sense of how many learning center teachers there are in each school by number of learning center students in each school by multiplying the number of teachers by the average caseload. So, for example, at Blanchard, the average caseload is just under 10. They're looking at 37, 38 students total who learn partially through learning centers. At Conant, we're talking about roughly 18 students who learn in the learning centers, and you can go down the list that way. One thing we did look at in particular is Gates is our smallest school right now, and they have a number of teachers that are not in a learning center, or that are learning center teachers. They do not have a program in Gates. They've done a really nice job working toward co-teaching, and there would certainly be an impact if we reduce this. But I think, one of the things that we're really challenged about is looking at a school that right now is the smallest school in the district, that even if we reduced one FTE in the learning centers at that school, they would still end up having what we predict will be the smallest caseloads of all of our schools. So that's really kind of what we're looking at overall in the numbers. I do want to highlight a few points for you, though. One, the needs of our students vary widely by school. We have a range of students in caseloads, and that can be driven for a variety of factors. Sometimes it's how many students are at a specific grade level, what classrooms are they in. It can also be the different needs that students have, but our caseloads range from 5 students to 13 students. I know that, and Marie, talked a little bit about the history of work at the district. A number of years ago, there was a collaborative study done with our educators around appropriate size caseloads in special education at the elementary. Marie, I think the numbers were 18 to 24 students at the time.
18 to 22.
18 to 22.
Yep.
I personally think that's too high for the type of services we're providing and that we want to provide. But we are certainly well below that recommended size. Our students are learning through a combination of in-class and pull-out services, depending on the needs of the individual child. And, there's at least one learning center teacher at each school that has a caseload under 12. Some other considerations when we are scheduling students, we have to schedule all of our students in special education on an individual basis because each student has individualized needs. And that often means that we need smaller caseloads for our special educators than what we would think of in a general education environment. So I don't want you comparing apples to oranges. We have to think carefully about how we group students with similar goals and needs. We also think about their student goals and the various accommodations that they need, as well as the intensity of needs and any related services that they have. As we get toward this, again, we're happy to hear the feedback around special education, but we wanted you to have the information on it as we have that discussion. Some funding and revenue changes, and I'm going to pause on this before we get to all-day kindergarten. But, a couple of things. The single largest change was a late change, and I mentioned this at the very end of the meeting last time, but there was a change in the allowable use of ARPA funds when the federal government issued the final rule. And what that means essentially for us is that in any community now, up to the first $10 million of ARPA funds can be used fully for revenue replacement. That means there were no restrictions as to how communities choose to use those funds. One of the challenges we experienced as we were proposing ARPA funds is we really had a strong need to try and fit any requests we were trying to make into the allowable categories. And the allowable categories were not designed specifically for school districts, so it made it really challenging to think about what we would request. What we're going to propose is initially one of the greatest budget drivers in this outside of health insurance was the need to backfill money into the community education revolving accounts. And that included community education and extended day. And that was as a result of a significant pandemic loss. All told, our revolving accounts lost about $2 million last year. We are proposing to use at least about $311,000 to replenish those, which would allow us to pay for some of the proposed changes that you're seeing in the budget. By doing that, it allows us to slow or defer some of that ComEd utility subsidy plan. Remember that last meeting, we were planning to transfer the cost of utilities and custodians back to the operating budget out of the ComEd revolving accounts because they couldn't afford it anymore. By using ARPA funds to replenish some of that, now we're able to actually slow that descent and have an opportunity to mitigate that budget impact. So that does have a positive budget impact of about $311,000. The other areas that we need to continue to work on in this budget are any other possible use of reserves, as well as any additional ARPA funds and how we want to use those. So those are our first three topics. We're going to go into a little more depth now with all-day kindergarten. Before I do this, I just want to thank Marie and Dave. They have spent a lot of time hashing out a series of different proposals for you. I think Maria, I think I'm talking through like the first slide, correct? On this? Oh, I don't hear Marie.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good.
I couldn't hear you for a second.
So, one, I want to start by saying we've already included the $180,000 for all-day kindergarten back into the budget that we're presenting to you tonight. So the amount that you saw with the $311,000 back in, through ARPA money, that really will pay for being able to keep the DEI director position in the budget, as well as being able to put the $180,000 toward all-day kindergarten. So that's our starting point, is we've returned to the plan that we said we were going to make. What we're actually going to do tonight is present 4 options for additional consideration for all-day kindergarten tuition for next year and beyond. We're going to talk about kind of the current plan and make sure everyone understands what we had committed to previously. We will also talk about a plan that Marie spent a lot of time working on to be able to actually reduce tuition all the way down to $1,800 for 3 consecutive years and then eliminate it fully. And we are recommending that you consider that plan. We are going to show you what it would look like if we just put all-day kindergarten fully into the budget and what significance of that kind of impact. We're not going to recommend that, but we want to show it to you. And then we're going to also show you another plan that we'd recommend for consideration that actually gets to free all-day K for next September and what that looks like. It's not without some pain, I will say, but we think that it's valuable enough to present to you, and we'd like you to consider that option as well. So I will turn it over to Marie and let her go through the details. And Marie, if you just keep saying next, I will keep clicking on slides.
All right. Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry I'm having audio issues, so just give me a signal if you can't hear me.
Marie, if you hear me start talking,
then I'll know.
then you'll know.
Thanks. So, I mean, the big change that happened was we learned until 2 weeks ago, we did not believe we could use ARPA money to across the board reduce tuition. So we were really kind of stuck with either putting 180 in the budget or not putting 180 in the budget. Now that we know that we can use ARPA money to lower tuition across the board, there are many more options available to us. So we're giving you 4 options here. This is what we're calling the current plan. This is
So this is the current plan.
can't hear me.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry. So this plan is what we put in motion 2 or 3 years ago. It basically lowers tuition by $750 a year and increases the budget by $180 a year. It takes 5 years at $180, and then the 6th year around $80,000. And we get to tuition-free kindergarten in FY27. So we no longer believe this is fast enough, and we know that we can use some ARPA to speed it up. So that was scenario 1. Scenario 2, next slide. I was so proud of this until we realized we could maybe do even better. So what this did is it lowers the tuition for next year to $1,800. It keeps it at $1,800 for 3 years and then makes it free after that. It uses a total of $500,000 of ARPA money, $200,000 next year, $200,000 in FY24, and $100,000 in FY25. You're still committed.
Sorry, Marie.
And after that. So that's consistent in all these plans is $180,000 for 5 years and $80,000 after that committed to the budget. So that is scenario 2. This is one which we recommend, but we have another one which we also recommend. The next one we're not recommending. If you wanted to go free for next year and increase the budget all at once, you'd have to increase the budget at this point by $900,000. We have 180 of it in the budget. It would require additional cuts of $720,000, which is roughly the equivalent to 10 full-time teachers and or assistants and teachers combined to total $721,000. In scenario 4, we actually think there's a possibility to get to free for next year by using more ARPA money. We do need to make more cuts in the budget to make this happen. So we really are between this option and the $1,800 option. So for this option, you need to cut, add to the budget $400,000 in this budget. So we have 180 in there. We need to make additional cuts of another 220,000. So I'll talk about that in a minute. If we could do that, and if we could use $500,000 of ARPA money in FY23, roughly $350,000 the following year, and $100,000 in FY25. So a total of almost $950,000 of ARP money. If we could do that, we could go free next year and be free every year after that. You'd be adding $400,000 in FY23. You'd add $180,000 for the following 2 years, 3 years really, and then it would be fully funded in the budget. In order to do this, we need to cut another $220,000 beyond everything you've seen so far. So that's either 3 additional full-time teachers or another grade level of assistance. Basically, a grade level of assistance at elementary is $180,000. We've already cut $180,000. So it would be another $180,000 plus, half a teacher or something like that. So there's a big thing for you all to consider. Do we want to keep it at $180 in this budget and go to $1,800 tuition for 3 years? Or do you want to cut another 3 FTE or more assistants, put 400,000 in the budget in FY23, and then get there faster, and you would have 0 tuition next year?
Okay, so we're looking for feedback, I think, in 3 specific areas right now. One, status in your ideas about us continuing to keep a DEI directorship position in the budget. Is this something that you want to see happen? Is this, did we miss on this proposal? I think another one we want to hear from you is around special education proposed staffing. And where do you want to see us go with this for the next iteration of the budget? And then, the discussion also around all-day kindergarten. We are recommending 2 proposals to you, but you can certainly, let us know the direction you want to go for that. All 3 of these, getting a strong sense of where we're going with these is really important tonight because we have work to do, and we're only a few weeks away now from our major budget presentation and workshop. So this is kind of the point in the budget where we need to know direction. Particularly around all-day K and special education, just to keep in mind, if we keep special education in the budget, we need to reduce another 72,000 somewhere for that. And then all-day K, there are 2 different pathways we're recommending. One will require additional reductions to the tune of probably around $220,000. Some of the numbers in that last all-day K proposal may shift. This is a fairly late-breaking proposal, but we're giving you the big picture of what to expect. So happy to open it up to questions and feedback at this point, and look forward to hearing from you on that.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Marie and Dave and the central office team for really, coming to the table at the last minute, having done some really hard work to get to some of the things that we had asked for. So, Ginny, you had your hand up first.
Oh, I can't believe I was first. Thank you. So, just a point of order. Are you wanting to hear DEI, then special ed, and then all-day kindergarten, or do you want to just throw out what we have to set up?
I think from my perspective, from point of expediency, let's have every person get an opportunity to say all of their thoughts about everything. Peter can parse it from there.
Okay. All right. So DEI, I think the directorship, it's something that I'm definitely in favor of. I'd like to hear more about it. Ultimately, not necessarily tonight, but I am definitely in favor of it. With respect to special education, it's my understanding generally, and also from an email we got from our chair of CPAC, that one of the reasons that Gates has such a small complement of special ed students is because they get weeded out basically in 4th grade, and that's how it's been, as Gates doesn't have a program that can accommodate many learning challenges. So I think in that way it feels a little bit strange to have it framed as they just don't exist in the Gates school. So I would like more clarification on that. I think that I'm just generally opposed to cutting special education, and I'm also a little bit stunned by the fall from 17% of our students having special education requirements in the 2014-2015 year to under 15, 21-22, which I don't think there's an explanation for. So that's just a little bit concerning. So, I just like to hear about the Gates moving kids out of the school and around 4th grade when their needs can't be met. And so, I'm just not sure that that's a true small sample size as opposed to a function of the services that are offered. With respect to all-day kindergarten, I have a couple questions. One is, if we do option 2, scenario 2, Marie, is there still going to be a half-day option offered? And no.
So, whatever.
At whatever point we go to free tuition, we would no longer offer half day.
So in scenario 2, we're reducing the tuition to $1,800 for the next 3 years, correct? So my question is, under that scenario, is there still going to be a half day offer?
For 3 years. As long as we have tuition, we need to keep half day.
Right. So for that reason, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this who would like to discuss it. I mean, it's very clear from all of the social science that 2.5 hours of school is insufficient for a 5-year-old, and I just think that from the standpoint of our first grade teachers and our families, even if they select it, I find it problematic that we're one of only, I think, 14 school districts that doesn't have universal all-day kindergarten. It would be as if we were offering a half-day option for third graders who would go to school for 2.5 hours. And even if the tuition was affordable, I think that we could all agree that that's just not something that we would want to offer as a district. So for that reason, I think it's, I'm in favor of scenario 4. I understand we're going to have to talk about cuts, but I think that this is important. I think this has been a multi-year effort. I don't think that there's any time that it's been more compelling and important to make this move than with the the impact suffered by our youngest learners after the pandemic and the families that they live with. So I'm in favor of scenario 4. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Tessa.
Thank you. Thanks for the comprehensive sort of update about that. Yes, as Jenny referenced, we did get some emails from the CPAC sort of outlining things, and having had 2 children in special education, I have some experience with this. I would much rather us look at the caseloads and look at the number of special educators we have, and look at the specific IEPs of the kids across all the across the district, and reshuffle the current special education staff that we have. I mean, I think that particularly at the at the junior high, where kids are already struggling with mental health of being 13 and 14, a lot of this pandemic stuff is really hitting there. And my personal experience has been that we don't necessarily have enough special educators to be able to truly meet the IEP needs, the individualized needs of the kids. Even with the staff that we have, there are kids being grouped together who should never be grouped together because they don't have similar educational needs yet. That's the way we plan for things and everything else. So I'm still against cutting the special education staff. I've read the feedback, and I certainly think that given the trajectory of the DEI work that we've already done, that it would be really remiss of us to not replace that position with some kind of director, because we've made some progress, and we have work in progress, and it would be we need somebody dedicated to that work. It's a lot of work. It was a lot of work for the superintendent, and having all the other jobs that she took care of on top of the DEI stuff. So I definitely think that's needed. And as far as the all-day K, it's time. It's time for us to do that. The community says that. I mean, other communities, Westford's going to full-time kindergarten. And there's such a huge difference between what we can offer, as long as we're still offering a half-day option, and what we can offer if we truly go tuition free, because a full day kindergarten program is entirely different than what we offer now. And as long as we're committed to the literacy work that we've been doing, then we owe that to all of our kindergartners to have a full day, a true full day experience where they really can be learning all of this. We've put a lot of money and a lot of work into the literacy program. So to have a half-day curriculum for all of our students, which is what we must maintain as long as we offer a half-day option, is really a shame. because we've already put the work and the money into that. And so it cannot really be fully realized unless we move to a full day option. And I expressed last time that I think those cuts should not come. The additional cuts we'll have to make shouldn't come in the form of teachers, but should come in the form of regular ed assistants, because we're the only district that does that. And the upper grades really don't need that kind of support. So I know the teachers are going to disagree with me, but I am a teacher and I can say that I never had that. So that's my opinion. Thanks.
Tessa. Nora. You're still muted, Nora. You lowered your hand. There you go.
What I did. Thank you for the presentation, and it's a difficult thing for us all to pour over, because these are each such things that are so important to all of us and all things that we've been working on. So I kind of feel like for me, streamlining it, the easiest thing to do is to say what my top priority would be out of the things that are sort of on the table, and for me, it would be all-day kindergarten. I think that's something that we've been working for so long, and it's something that the community definitely feels is just necessary for it to happen now to benefit the district, as a whole, all of the students. And if it looks as if it's necessary in the budget to make cuts different places in order to make that happen, so I would be in favor of supporting the all-day K as a top priority.
Thank you. Amy.
I have a question first. The special ed assistant was in, so my question is, have you already, when you're discussing the deficit based with the all-day K, does that include not having a special ed? Does that include the special ed cut? Or have you put all three positions back into this kind of idea, put it back into the budget, and the only thing that we're talking about in terms of deficit is the all-day K right now?
No,
I mean, in terms of, I know the bigger budget, yeah.
That's a great question for clarification. The DEI position is now sitting back in the budget and was funded through kind of that return of the use of ComEd funds for utilities / custodians. So the DEI position came back in. The special ed position, we wanted to present the numbers to you tonight and get direction. So that is not included in the budget. So if you choose option 4 for all-day K, and we want to restore the special ed position, we need to go find $220,000 plus $72,000. So just shy of $300,000 is the next step.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I have to agree what everyone has said. I think all three positions are incredibly important. I would definitely, I would say the DEI position, director position, it sounds like we've already funded it. So we can do that. Absolutely. I believe it's extremely important. And, all-day K, we've been working for it. I can't speak as well to the special ed. I'm just going to rely on some of the other people on the committee that are expressing how important it is. So I'm going to rely on their expertise and say, let's do all three.
Thanks, Amy. Ben. Still on mute.
There we go. I had unclicked raise my hand. As a parent of a special education student, I can attest to the importance and the need of those staff who support our children within the schools. I can also attest to what my colleague Tessa said about having students who are not at the same level being grouped into special ed groups where one child's needs is much different than my son's needs. That said, I am against any sort of cuts to special education. Being somebody who had an IEP growing up, going through high school and junior high school, I know the importance and I know the impact that it has on students. So for me, the no-brainer is no cuts to special education. In terms of all day K, I'm fine with either step 2 or step 4. The fiscally prudent side of me would say yes, step 2, and bring it down incrementally over time. But the parent in me, and knowing all the hard work that my colleagues have put in towards the literacy program, we don't want to waste time and money and efforts on delaying all day K. So ultimately, I believe that all day K should be implemented. And lastly, with DEI, of course, I support the hiring or the retention of the director to ensure that we meet the needs of our community in terms of those individuals who are African American, Latino, Jewish, LGBTQ, you name it, protected classes. So important that we meet that mandate. That's all I have, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Kyra.
Thank you, Adam. I just want to say thank you so much to the entire administrative team for hearing all of our needs and for taking this into consideration and doing these hours of hard work. And I think that what you've presented tonight is something kind of extraordinary. So I just want to say that out loud and put it on the record, just to say thank you and to recognize just the gift of loving care that you put on the table tonight. And that being said, what is on the table for us to consider are 3 vulnerable communities, right? Our special education community, our diverse community, and our youngest learners. These are 3 vulnerable communities that must be invested in different ways. And so, while it's, maybe not the most financially prudent thing to do, I have to say we must invest in all 3 of these things. And we're going to lose something. And I do not want to be cavalier about the loss. And I think that, I am not a student of the history of assistance in this district. I'm not going to comment on that part. I think that holding on to our full-time educators is probably the wisest thing to do in this scenario. But I think that's probably, the bigger discussion for another time. But if we must sacrifice, and put something at the altar so that these 3 vulnerable communities can get what they need in a most significant moment, I think that we should do that. And it will be expensive. But, we'll talk about this during the budget sub check-in, but, there's still opportunities out there for us to get, funding that we need, hopefully to help with some of this. So, it looks dire and mean and hard, and it will be those things, but hopefully we can help mitigate along the way. So this is just me saying thank you. And I want to say one more thing, because I think this is also really important. There are folks who are going to look at this change in the DEI position and say, why not deputy superintendent? So I want to put an extra emphasis on the specialist instead of generalist part of this job description, and that we will have a person who is dedicated only to this. And that is not to critique Dawn. I am deeply grateful for the work that Dawn has done, for her time and dedication, and again, loving service to many communities in our district under many hats for many jobs. And now what we're going to do is just give a laser focus to put that protocol to work, because Lord, we need it. To do other things, to, just as Andrew said, to prevent bad things from happening to begin with through education and time and service and care. So, think not of the title, but think of the job description, because that's what we're going for here. And in that, I will stop talking.
Thank you, Kyra. John.
So let me start where Kyra left off. I do support the idea of the director level DEI position. I think Kyra very nicely stated why that is a good response. The second thing that I want to say is sort of writ large is that the ratio of students to administrators and students to special educators and students to regular educators is going to increase because we are in fact constrained by the budget. So this discussion really is, to the extent that those ratios are going in the direction that we don't want, which ones do we want to take more of the hit in and which ones do we take less? So let me agree with Tessa, and some other comments that were made that said, I think the assistance in terms of the value that they can add, is lower than some of the other positions. So I do see that as one opportunity to help with the budget. But having said that, there will be more work to do. And so I actually believe that there are opportunities at each of those levels, administrators, special educators, and regular educators, to work on this over time. Peter and Marie will not be surprised to hear me say that if you want to make me crazy, all you have to do is to tie a particular source of funding to a particular project, because all of this money can move anywhere. And if you want to make me even crazier, then take one-time money like ARPA and use it to address a recurring expense or revenue issue, and then I'll be fully crazy. So I'm very happy to talk about why we should advocate for additional ARPA funding and put that in a bucket that we call revenue. And then at some point, we will compare all of our revenue against all of our expenses, and that has to tie. And the further bad news that I have, with respect to this discussion, is that the budget doesn't tie in the ALG plan. As when we come to that point, you'll see there's still a gap in the ALG plan of $1.7 million. And again, as a reminder, Acton is at the levy limit. So it's not like the outcome of this is going to be, hey, we're just going to go back and increase taxes more. That's not going to happen. So absolutely, what's going to happen through this process is we're going to decide to do some things and not to do some other things. So, I've already commented that with regard to special educators, I do actually think that the student-teacher ratio there, there's some opportunities to improve. I hope that, in the combination of Douglas Gates, once everybody is inside the same physical structure, there will be some opportunities to use staff more efficiently just because they're inside the same shell. I don't know if that's true or not. And then the last thing that I want to say, with respect to all-day K. So my two children, like most people's children, were actually quite different. My son, started in the integrated preschool. That was extremely important for him and his development. My daughter just about died in a half day of kindergarten with her late April birthday. That was way too much. So I get that for some kids, what they can learn and how that matches with their development in an all-day curricular program, that's important. But to portray the situation as that's important for all kids, that's certainly not correct. And I'm not very certain that it's even important for most kids. But the consequence of trying to forego that revenue now will be to do exactly what Jenny said she didn't want to do, is to have, half day third grade. The money is going to come from someplace in the budget. And, to the extent that we've used, one-time funds and sort of managed our way through 23 and 24, at the end, ARPA is over. And, those expenses remain, and they will compete with all of the other, activities in the district, for the budget. So I would be very much, opposed to, foregoing, all of the all-day K revenue at this point in time. I do want to share that, we've had discussions about the impact on working families, and we had to the Shell a number of emails that talk about, the significant financial challenges for young families. And absolutely, I recognize that is an issue. It's an issue. We've talked about it in terms of school schedule to try and provide better supports. And when we better support parents, of course, we better support their children. So that's not lost on me. But this is a budget, of some really difficult challenges. And so I would be very cautious about the reduction in revenue associated with all-day K. I would be very cautious about budgets where we've used a lot of one-time money without a plan, 3 to 4 years out, that's going to give us recurring revenue that will cover the structure that we have built. So, to the extent that the argument is there are some specific things in 23 and 24 that we're doing as part of our COVID recovery, and that's where this one-time money is really flowing, that works for me. But to the extent that we're doing some things to say, oh, this goes on for forever, I think that's setting, this committee and this community up for some really significant challenges in the years ahead.
Thanks, John. Yevon.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for Marie for your presentation. So I have a couple of comments, also questions. So regarding the DEI, I would say, so district definitely has a better sense about the progress on our DEI progress, basically. So you guys definitely have some reasons to come up with the original budget, and so but if we wanted to have, say, DEI directors, so let's visit. Do we have a concrete plan for in the next couple of years for this position to achieve? Basically, what are the goals we wanted to have to have this director to achieve? Basically, so that's one. So for the special education, so quick question is how much budget cut related to the general education? Do we have a data?
You're on mute, Peter.
I want to make sure I understand the question. How much in this budget is general? Can you just refine that a little
Do
more?
we see any budget cut related to general education?
We did. We have reduced 3 high school FTE. And that's also a factor, just as a reminder, of declining enrollment at the high school, where they've gone down by, and Marie can give me the number, I'm thinking roughly 200 students over the last couple of years. And we have not been reducing staff there proportionally.
Yeah, so I can recall Marie said it was 10 FTE or somewhere, right? So like also Peter mentioned, right? So we're kind of already, Peter made a good argument about the reduce the SE in the gates or possibilities. So I would say that I'll buy that. It's I think that makes sense. And also, so the district has a caseload, right? We have a way below the state level, right? That's my understanding.
I would have to look up and get a little bit more data around. I think the email that we received from one of the CPAC members, she wasn't talking about caseloads in that email. She was talking about the percentage of students of our overall student population who have been identified with a disability and have an IEP. And that has been declining. And I think the point there, though, was why are we seeing that percentage decline? The percentage generally would hold steady as a trend line, regardless of what numbers do. I think she was making maybe a different point.
Well, yeah. So anyway, as long as I would say it would be good to have some state guideline about the special education. If we can meet that, while we can reduce the number of special education, I would support that. So regarding the ADK, I would say that this is a really, it's a wonderful thing. So it could have a very big impact on the whole community, has a biggest impact on the student population. But one question is, so we see we're going to use Arbor $500,000 in the FY23, and we hope we can get another $300K in the FY24. So that's also. So my question will be: so what is the impact of using, say, $500,000 Arbor dollars on the 80K to the other budget? Basically, I assume Arbor can be used for the other purpose, right? It's not only for the 80K, right? So allocating $500,000 to the Arbor money to the 80K will also impact the other items. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been thinking about kind of process from here and what comes next. Dave, Marie, and I have been working on, under the new ARPA guidelines, we actually have developed kind of a draft version of an ARPA budget for that. So I actually think what I foresee happening maybe at the next meeting is us going through that with the committee of, kind of in the new guidelines, here's how we would intend to use ARPA funds over the next few years, because I think you need a sense of that. As you're thinking about this decision. And then just, while I'm kind of pausing and answering that question, that also leads me, this is feedback at this point. At some point, the committee is going to have to make a decision around all day K. Your decision around all day K will come in the form of a vote to set the tuition for FY23, right? That's the formal process. That's probably going to happen at the next meeting. So I just, while we're pausing, but if I was sitting in your seat, I'd want to see what the overall plan for ARPA looks like before I make that decision. So I just want to recognize both of those at the same time.
Yeah.
And, so, if I can just comment on one other thing too, because it's come up from a number of people. In terms of the transition to having all students, like a universal all-day program, that's actually as much a function of curriculum and scheduling as anything else. Right now, because we offer a half-day program, we have to operate our entire kindergarten schedule in all classrooms around a half-day schedule because we can't provide math in the afternoon if our some of the kids in every classroom are leaving, to go home in the afternoon. So everything we need all kids to do has to happen in the morning, and then the afternoon just becomes enrichment. And I think, this shift now frees up scheduling and it frees up curricular time to be able to take place throughout the day, which actually means that we're not trying to jam all the academics into a short time. We can really incorporate play more throughout the day at more regular intervals and really think about like a developmental kindergarten program as opposed to trying to break up in two chunks that are very segmented. So it's not without reason why the change in tuition also results in a different type of a program.
Yeah, totally understand. My kids was in the all-day kindergarten, right? But for the whole afternoon, it just becomes a daycare. So that's drive me crazy, basically. But anyway, if I have to say support, which one? So all these are good things, but based on the budget, I guess, Peter, your team also has a really hardship trying to come up with the plans and original plan. So, and we also have the original plan we approved, right? Voted. So I would say it's okay for me to stick to the original plan. But if we have to say which one, we choose 80K as a priority. Well, start with maybe option 2. That's what I would support that.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
Evelyn.
I'll keep it short. So I just want to say that I support the DEI director. I support special ed and option 4 for kindergarten. Thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Andrew, I saw you had your hand up before. Do you want to make a comment?
I was thinking of talking a long time about a lot of things, but the DEI thing is really important because it's focused. I think that after the last year we've had, last couple of years, having special ed is going to be more important because of the deficits that are going to happen just because of everyone going through all of the stuff we've been going through. And the school district has had a commitment to all day K. Scenario 4 scares me, but the other two seem like you're splitting the baby, and it doesn't make sense. And finally, Kyra just said everything so well. She touched on the heart of what we're doing here. And, she said it before, budget is a moral document. And, by looking at the cuts hitting our vulnerable communities, it's important. It's so important. We need to understand how this realigns all of our district and balance our real need to support our whole community with the pain of potentially losing some members of it from the staff point of view. So I'm with you on the things that we are offering here. I'd like to find a way to find more money to be able to keep as many people as we can, because I think the roles that we're talking about are really important. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. All right, I will be brief as well with my thoughts and comments. And I appreciate all of the feedback from this committee. This is going to be a difficult decision. And I think what I'm starting to hear from everybody is we want it all. But when we say we want it all, it also means we have to give some things up. And so, if we're making that decision, we have to be prepared for the consequences of that. And as John mentioned, we're still off as compared to the ALG plan, which means that, there's still some work to be done here. With regards to all day K, I'm a big fan of option number 4 for a couple reasons. Option number 2 still commits future committees to continuing to reduce tuition or make these budget changes. And we've already broken, in some ways, our commitment from the past, where we said, okay, we're going to reduce by $750 every year. Oh, wait, there's a giant pandemic, and we stopped doing that. So for me, if we cut tuition to 0 right now, we say we are committed. We still have to increase the budget year over year, but we use ARPA money to be that buffer instead of the money, the funds from our community. So I think it's a excellent use of the ARPA funds. It's not to fund those people in perpetuity. It's to basically take that burden off the backs of our families and use pandemic recovery funds to give us the time we need to incrementally add that to our budget. So I think option number 4 for ADK makes a lot of sense. Of course, I support the DEI director. I look forward to some more input and feedback from Peter and the team around what is that job description? What does it look like for the rest of the central office staff? Because we are, as Peter said, we're taking a generalist away and putting a specialist in. We are, we're losing something. And so we need to understand how that trickles down to everybody inside the central office. And I'll tell you, I'm a little torn on the special educator position. I think the first thing that I go back to is that it was last year or 2 years ago, Peter came to us mid-year and said, we have some increased special education needs. I'm adding 1 or 2 special educators to a school program. The district has proven to be extremely reactive when those needs arise and there's a justifiable reason. And obviously this committee is fully in support of that. I think that we are up against a tough budget, and the numbers there, pure caseload-based numbers, do show some disparities around our school community. And if you said to me, I need to save this $70,000, or we can come into the ALG plan if we cut this $70,000, but if in 6 months Jen comes back to us and says, oh, we need another person, the committee will be 100% behind that. So I am, for me, it's the special education position is very important, but it's also the one that I would say maybe we take out for now and reevaluate as we start to reorganize next year. Those are my thoughts. I see we have 2 members of the public with their hands up, so I will call on Gary first, and thank you to those members of the public who have been so patient. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you, and good discussion. A couple questions. Peter, one for you. You keep talking about the ARPA funds. What does the region have for ARPA right now, between what Boxborough donated, what Acton donated, and what the region received?
So my Boxborough committed $375,000 is what we got In Acton, I believe, it's a little bit different. They had committed, it sounds like 1.5 million, but are holding 500,000 in reserve as potential. So I think that's it's just organized a little bit differently. So it's somewhere between, Dave, correct my math, 1.8 million and 2.375.
And did the region receive anything directly, or is it only from Acton and Boxborough?
Directly from ARPA?
Yes.
No, there have been some other sources of aid that did go direct to schools, the form of ESSER money, but those were passed and those were spent down well in the pandemic with all the different schooling options we had.
Okay.
Yeah,
And I
those are
think-
committed. Regional schools aren't a recipient of ARPA money.
Okay, thank you. And I heard you say that next meeting you'll have more definition of how you'll be thinking of spending the ARPA funds. So,
Yeah, we're pretty close to having, a good budget that we can present to that. So I think we're looking at that for next meeting.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to comment on is you've been working as your so-called baseline of 4.59% increase. But that's still a huge increase for Boxborough at $750,000 or 5.8%. Members of the Finance Committee in Boxborough would like to see that even lower, but I understand there's trade-offs. But all I'm trying to say is that your baseline is still pretty high for us. So trying to add more things and not take away is very difficult. From a taxpayer, you have all your stakeholders. You have your students, your teachers, and your parents, and the taxpayers. And there's trade-offs. I will say, I used to be on the Boxborough School Committee for a while, and I was a heavy supporter of all-day kindergarten back 8 or 10 years ago. I think it's an important thing. I think when you're splitting, it's really bad for the students. But again, it's trade-offs. And that's what you as our appointed officials or elected officials actually have to play with and understand is what's best for everybody. And where do you make how do you negotiate the differences or come up with agreements for everybody? That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Kyra, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Kyra Lafferty on behalf of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. We wanted to request that you carefully reflect on the proposed budget cut to remove a special educator, particularly right now following the most significant disruption to education in a century. Reducing special education spending is inconsistent with stated district goals, and we must be cognizant that learning loss continues to compound for some special education students. Irrespective of the crisis-driven pandemic consequences to special education, we are requesting clarification on the trajectory of special education population in the district. It was stated in the last meeting that the number of students served on IEPs was reduced by 250 students recently. Students accessing special education services are those with disabilities. It was explained the number of students on IEPs may be lower as a result of more comprehensive programming, declining student enrollment, among others, but the overall percentage of students with disabilities should remain fairly consistent regardless of these factors. However, our district's percentage of students on IEPs has fallen well below the statewide average of over 18%. According to DESE, the percentage of students in our district has fallen each year for the prior 5 years from 17% to 14.7% now. If the proposal to eliminate a special educator is due to the purported low caseloads, we would urge this committee to understand why caseloads are presently so low in our school district. Where did those students with disabilities go? How are they being served? Additionally, we must understand special educators are under some of the most pressure in our school. They're doing more evaluations, mistering remote school, offering state-mandated COVID compensatory services. How could we ask fewer of them to do more now? We urge you again to consider the need to reallocate special education resources rather than removing even one special educator. We wish you luck with your really difficult process that you're engaging in, and thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Kyra. All right, any final questions or comments on the budget? Peter, do you feel like you've got good enough direction from the committee to go forward to the next step?
I think so. I think, I'm hearing, consensus around kind of wanting all three things. So, I think probably what I will bring back next is what do the commensurate reductions look like that would pay for those three things? I think still to be determined is, any other use of E&D, and we also really need to hash out what is going to look at, like, what will the budgets look like balanced with the two towns too. And that's going to be a really important step. So, I know this is going to be an iterative process. I think, in all honesty, I think ALG has a lot of work ahead of it in a fairly short amount of time, because I know we are on a tight timeline because we have to have a voted budget by a certain date. So, we don't have 3 months to solve this problem either. This is really, in the next month that we have to get this done. So again, I think I'm going to come back to you around ARPA next time and give you a proposed ARPA budget. The other one, I think anticipate next meeting we're going to be voting what kindergarten tuition will look like. So I think you're going to want to give thought to that between now and next meeting, because that will be the kind of way the school committee speaks on this, is through that vote. And, I hear there's interest, in, maybe learning more about special education. I don't know if caseloads will be part of a, if we're adding it in, I don't know that position. I don't know as though we would go into a deep presentation on it as part of the budget process around caseloads and overall special ed numbers, but that's certainly something we could schedule a presentation for maybe later in the year. That's my kind of initial thinking around what I'm hearing tonight, if that feels consistent to you, Adam.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Well, I will, before we move on to the subcommittee and member reports, Kyra being the first one, I just want to one more time express some gratitude to Peter, Dave, Marie, everybody in the central office for really sharpening your pencils, coming up with some really unique ideas and options for us to consider, particularly for the all-day K. I think you guys did some great work there, so I appreciate that. All right, moving on to subcommittee and member reports. The first will be the budget subcommittee report. Kyra.
I recognize the time, and we've been talking about budget all night, so I will keep this brief. I want to thank the subcommittee for a really robust conversation about these 80K options. We started the meeting. I kind of derailed it with, what are we going to do about 80K? And it just went from there. And again, this team really listened to us debate in subcommittee about, presenting options for all day K and really what are the options and how do we bring them to this meeting. So I just want to say thank you to the whole subcommittee, and then thank you to the team for listening to that and bringing this tonight. I also want to inform the committee that we did have Adam, Peter, I believe Marie was there. Marie, were you there? And Dave, we had a meeting with our state legislative representatives, so Senator Eldridge and Representatives Govea and Senna, to talk about some of the red tape that we have been experiencing while trying to get aid from the state, especially around our early childhood education programs and community ed, and trying to replenish these funds from the state. So that was a very productive meeting. I'm really grateful for their time, and hopefully we will see movement. We have another meeting coming up with at least one federal legislative aid in the next week. And in the meantime, Dave's team has been on the phone and, doing his best to get us money from these various pools of aid. So, I don't have the full numbers. I don't know how all of this is going to shake out, but there is work happening, and hopefully that means that there is help coming. I think that's basically it. We discussed that budget. We talked about 80K, and the results are what you see tonight. And so this is work, y'all. It's so much work. It's work for the administration. It's work for us, and it's really good work. We're risking big things for good things. So I just want to say thank you for everyone who's been participating. Thank you for risking something big for something good.
Thank you, Kyra. And I just want to express my gratitude to Kyra for all of the advocacy that she has been doing on behalf of the students of the district with our legislators. She's really spearheaded this project to raise the profile of the district and some of the unique needs that we may have. And so I want to thank you, Kyra, for that work, and look forward to continuing to do that with you. All right, Policy Subcommittee, Nora.
So I wasn't able to attend the last policy meeting, and I didn't know Ginny chaired it. I don't know if you want to comment on it, Ginny. I know we're just working on the same policy.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, Andrew had our social media policy, draft policy, and procedures reviewed by council, who sent it back to us slightly longer than it had been. And so we went through it again, and I think we're going to have it ready for a first read. I don't think the 7th, but maybe after that, the next meeting after that. So it's in good shape, and it will be coming at you.
Great, thank you both. Community engagement, Andrew.
Thanks. The ABRSC CESC met on January 14th and approved our previous meetings minutes, most of which was just coming up with that acronym. We discussed the guidance around policy and roles associated with the committee, included ways of refining the roles of community members, ways of listening to the community, collecting and managing inbound messages, outbound information, maintaining our records. We recognize that engagement is omnidirectional and that a clear strategy is necessary to ensure a great relationship between the committee and the community. So we reviewed methods of engagement, identified the need for a communications plan, and need to develop an outline for a workshop and consultation with our wider group. And our near-term policy is to provide additional guidelines to create policy with our friends in the policy committee. Our next meeting will be February 4th. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, Peter, is there an update from the mascot screening committee?
Just add that we have a survey out to the community at this point. We had a good, successful meeting of the mascot screening committee. Our students continue to amaze us with their insight into the process, their thoughtfulness about how they're going about this. I appreciate everything that they're doing to lead this work. I also appreciate, the staff at the high school and junior high who are working with them to help them, facilitate, a challenging process. We have collected, I believe over 2,000 responses at this point to the survey. We sent the survey out to over 20,000 email addresses as part of the distribution network. We are sending reminders at the district level. We're asking elementary principals to, put some reminders in their newsletters. Same thing for high school, junior high. We want to get things posted to the district website and, the high school website, so anyone visiting there can go and get information. We also did some paper flyers with a QR code that some of our, the adult committee, so to speak, or the subcommittee actually was able to pick some up and actually help distribute those around different places in Acton, so people who might visit can gauge some interest there. So we're continuing to work on making sure people know the survey's out there, publicizing it, reminding people of what we said, and then telling them what we reminded them. So hopefully that we people are well aware of the process. Next steps for kids, once they get the data in, they're going to take a look at that. Good news is it's a great data analysis exercise for them with some qualitative data as well as quantitative data. They will put that together, make some sense out of it, figure out what their next steps need to be based on what they're seeing, and then we'll be able to update you more.
Thanks, Peter. And a reminder, the deadline for those suggestions is February 4th.
Yep. And Adam, at some point, we missed it kind of in the budget update, but so I don't know if you're open to allowing Dave to talk for, a minute, because I think he has a little bit of good budget news to share with the committee.
I'm always willing to celebrate the wins. So Dave, if you've got a win you want to share with us, go for it.
Well, it's not a win yet. We actually described it as this. So it's the last few seconds, it's the last play of a football game, and we just completed a pass for a touchdown, and we're in the process of celebrating, but then somebody said, hey, wait, let's make sure that nobody threw a flag. And so we're waiting to see if there's a flag. And so what it is that totally out of the blue, we got an email from our rep at FEMA saying that they approved 90-something% of our most recent submission, which, if you recall, was $468,000 worth of previously ineligible costs related to HVAC and air quality, which they said was routine maintenance and not health and safety under FEMA's guidelines. The flag is whether somebody at the last review stage of FEMA decides, wait a second, no, we're going to rescind that. But we're really hopeful that by telling us that that in a preliminary process it's been approved, it's going to be very tough to go back at this point. So we were looking at having to claw back almost $500,000 of money that's been spent and either find another funding source, which my thought was going to be Arbor, or it was going to hit E&D at some point. Now it looks like that by and large that deficit is going to go away, and so we are thankful that FEMA, in our opinion, made the right decision.
And I don't think anyone could appreciate just how many hours Dave has spent on this issue. I think he's pretty much yelled at every person that he passes on the street at this point.
Well, and nobody here would know this, but if in fact I spent hours on it, it's far less than what my assistant Tom Blondin spent on it. He's the one who pushes the buttons, the keys on the typewriter to submit applications and track everything. And we had a little joyous celebration yesterday when we got this news.
Thanks, Dave. I see you, John. I just want to hold on a second. I knew there were members of the public who were waiting for the item on the agenda for the mascot screening. So I do want to I think it was Mr. Sarno, just give you a second. If you did want to make a comment, please feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you. And John, did you want to make a comment while we're waiting to see if anybody from the public raises their hand?
Yeah, well, all of the excitement, I just wanted to make sure we had a chance for me to report out on ALG.
Please, by all means.
The Acton Leadership Group met this morning with Kyra and myself as school committee representatives. Both the schools and town reported FY22 expenses aligned with budget expectations. Town and school have updated budgets in the ALG plan. While the town budget has been formally presented and reviewed with the Acton FinCom, the school budget is at an earlier state of development, as you all know well, and will undergo changes as part of school committee discussions. Marie commented that with the proposed budgets, the deficit in the ALG plan is $1.7 million, and this deficit needs to be a focus of our next meeting. And as Peter said, the clock is ticking. This is the hard discussion in the next month. John Manchiarati described the process by which ARPA funds have been allocated. Dave Martin and John noted that comments had been received from the public and school committee members that the January ARPA rule change the standard deduction of up to $10 million was of such significance that the select board should revisit the ARPA allocation decision. David and John argued that the process in the fall was good, and without a specific update to request, there was no reason to reopen the discussion of ARPA allocation or to commit any of the uncommitted ARPA funds. School administration, again, as Peter has described, is in the process of reviewing educational requests in light of the rule change, and the discussion will continue at ALG on the 3rd of February.
Thanks, John. Kyra.
I just want to add one more thing to this and remind this committee and the select board and anyone else who's been following this process that I went to the select board during that initial process and asked for an allocation of $2.6 million. We only were allocated $2 million. And it would seem that it's kind of funky around that number. So as we continue this conversation, I do hope that however if the process is not reopened or if it's reconsidered or if there's just a little bit of wiggle room made, that we are considered at that 2.6 mark because that's what we asked for and that's what we need, if not a little more.
John, you've got 30 seconds.
I just wanted to remind everybody that if we look at the dislocation in the schools associated with the pandemic, as opposed to the dislocation in municipalities, in my view, there simply is no comparison. Last year, we as a district had to create a whole new remote school. There is so much more that was impactful on education than was impactful on municipal services, that I think as we look at this as a community, there's a lot of reason to think that ARPA relief should be directed towards educational needs.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the consent agenda. As I read this out, I'll just ask that someone try and pull up their statement of warrants because that's the next item. And remind everybody as we go through our roll call votes, I'll go alphabetical by last name. So items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I'll read each item name, and if any member would like it held, you say hold. Item number 1 is the approval of the ABRSC meeting minutes of just December 16th, 2021. Item number 2, the approval of donations valued over $1,000 from the Blanchard PTF. And item number 3 is approval of donations valued over $1,000 to the R.J. Gray Junior High School. Hearing no holds, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
That was moved by Kyra and seconded by Ben, and we'll go through our roll call vote. Evelyn.
Yes.
Ben.
Yes.
Kyra.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Tessa.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Nora.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Yevon.
Yes.
And myself is a yes. That is unanimous. Thank you all. Next, statement of warrants. Recommendation to approve. If everyone has reviewed the warrants, the motion language is found at the end of Dave's memo. Would someone like to make that motion, please?
Okay. I move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrants as follows. Number P 2215 dated 1/13/2022 in the amount of $2,825,366.02. Payroll deduction warrants as follows. Number 22-015 PR dated 1/13/2022 in the amount of $574,338.58. And vendor warrants as follows. Number 22-015 dated 1/20/2022 in the amount of $564.42. It's
Second.
late, y'all. It's late.
John, was that your second there?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, and we'll go through again. Roll call vote. Evelyn.
Yes.
Ben.
Yes.
Kyra.
Yes.
Ginny.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Tessa.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Nora.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Yevon.
Yes.
and myself, yes. That is also unanimous. Thank you all. Before we adjourn, Peter, is there anything in the FYI that you would like to highlight?
I don't know. I'm just briefly looking. I don't know. Beth, did you include anything about upcoming election and school committee positions?
Yes, both the Acton and Boxborough town meeting dates and election calendars and open positions have been added to the FYI.
I think that's probably the big one. But otherwise, I will say I think we've been here long enough.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to moved.
Seconded.
All right. I'm going to give that motion to Kyra and the second to Ben. And one last time, around the room, Evelyn?
Yes, with gratitude.
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes, with gratitude.
Ginny?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Tessa?
Oh, yes.
John?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Andrew?
I'm thinking, yes.